Never go to the farm, Kendra. Promise me. He said it only a handful of times in 34 years of marriage, and every time his voice dropped into a register I did not recognize, low and careful, as if the words themselves cost him something to lift. Daniel was a gentle man. He was the kind of husband who warmed my side of the bed with his own body on winter mornings before I woke, who remembered the names of my students years after they had graduated, who never once raised his voice in all our years together. So when he asked me to promise, I promised. I never truly understood why that place from his childhood frightened him, a place he almost never described and refused to name with any warmth, but I loved him enough not to press. I told myself that everyone is allowed one locked door. He died on an ordinary Tuesday in early spring, a heart attack sudden and complete in the kitchen while the coffee was still dripping into the pot. He was 66 years old. I was 63, and in the space of a single morning I became a widow with a grown daughter who had drifted somewhere I could no longer reach and a hollow place beneath my ribs where certainty used to sit. People say that grief comes in waves. What no one tells you is that in the first weeks, it is not a wave at all. It is a fog, thick and colorless, and you move through your own house like a guest who cannot remember why she came. 2 weeks after the funeral, I sat in the office of Harlan Pierce, the attorney who had handled Daniel's affairs. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish, and the finality of death had been reduced to a stack of documents and a pen that felt too heavy in my hand. Mr. Pierce was a patient man near my own age with reading glasses that he pushed up his nose whenever he was about to say something he considered delicate. "There is one more item, Mrs. Calloway," he said, and slid a small wooden box across the desk toward me. Inside lay an antique brass key on a leather cord worn smooth by someone's thumb, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Daniel's precise upright hand. "What is this?" I asked. My voice sounded far away even to me. 3 years ago, your husband purchased a property in Montana," Mr. Pierce said. "He placed it into a living trust, and under the terms of that trust, it passes to you outside of probate. He confirmed the mineral rights had never been separated from the land, so they belong to the property in full. The taxes are current. It is called Larkspur Hollow Farm." "A farm," I repeated. Daniel did not own a farm. We lived on a teacher's pension and an architect's savings in a quiet house in Minnesota. He designed schools and libraries and small municipal buildings, and years ago he had built up his own practice and then sold it, which had given us a cushion I never learned the exact shape of because he handled those things and I let him. But a farm in Montana was not a cushion. It was another life. It was his childhood home, Mr. Pierce said gently. The land had left the family long ago and changed hands several times. Your husband bought it back 3 years ago when it was in ruins and the price was low and he restored it. He watched my face. "There is something else you should understand. The property has become quite valuable in the last year and a half. Deposits of rare earth minerals were confirmed in the region, and Larkspur Hollow sits on top of a significant share of them. Your husband turned down every offer that came his way." I could not speak. The room seemed to tilt slightly the way a floor does on a boat. "I will be honest with you," Mr. Pierce continued, "because your husband asked me to be. His brothers have filed an objection to the trust. They are claiming Daniel was not mentally competent when he made his arrangements. Given the value of the land, they intend to be aggressive." "That is absurd," I said, and heard my own certainty with surprise. Daniel was the most rational person I have ever known. He balanced our checkbook to the penny. He read the fine print on everything. "I know," Mr. Pierce said, "and a heart condition is not a condition of the mind. It will not be easy for them. But easy and impossible are different words Mrs. Calloway and men with money can afford to blur the line for a long time." I opened the envelope with fingers that did not feel like mine. "My dearest Kendra," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have left you sooner than either of us planned, and I am sorry. There is so much I should have told you and could not bring myself to say. The farm is yours now. For 3 years I have been turning the broken place of my childhood into something worthy of you. I know I made you promise never to go there, and I am releasing you from that promise. In fact, I am asking you to break it just once before you decide what to do with any of it. In the study, there is a laptop on the desk. The password is the date we met, and then your maiden name. Go, Kendra. Let me show you the thing I could not show you while I was alive. I love you more than I ever managed to say out loud. Daniel." I pressed the letter to my chest in that stuffy office and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not the polite tears I had allowed myself in front of the neighbors. but the real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere older than words. Even gone, he was still ahead of me. Even gone, he had left a map. "I am going," I told Mr. Pierce when I could trust my voice again. "I am going to Montana." 2 days later, after a hastily booked flight and a long drive north from the airport through country that grew wider and emptier, with every mile I found myself slowing in front of a set of iron gates. The name Larkspur Hollow had been worked into the metal in a spare, elegant script. Beyond the gates, the land rolled away in soft gold hills, stands of aspen going amber with the turn of the season, and in the distance a farmhouse and several outbuildings, all freshly painted, all cared for. This was not the broken place I had braced myself to find. This was an estate. This was somewhere a person could disappear into a whole different version of a life. The brass key turned in the gate lock as if it had been oiled that morning. I drove up a curving gravel lane with my heart going hard against my ribs, and I could not have told you whether it was grief, or fear, or a strange thin thread of hope. What had my husband hidden out here for 3 years, driving away on what he had always called business trips? What part of himself had he kept in a locked room for the whole of our marriage? The farmhouse rose 2 stories with a deep porch and tall windows that caught the low afternoon light. Nothing about it whispered pain. Everything about it had been loved back into being. I climbed the porch steps, slid the key into the front door, and felt the lock give with a soft, solid click. The door swung open, and I stepped across the threshold into my husband's secret world, and what I saw inside took the strength out of my knees, so that I had to catch the door frame with one hand. The entry opened into a great room with exposed beams and a stone fireplace, but it was not the architecture that stopped my breath. It was the books. Shelves climbed every wall to the ceiling, and behind glass in the places of honor sat first editions of the novels I had loved my whole life, the ones I had read to Sloane when she was small, the ones that had made a young woman in a college library decide once that she wanted to write. Framed on the walls between the shelves were manuscript pages, real ones, foxed and typewritten, mounted like art. On a wide desk by the window positioned to look out over the eastern pasture sat a silver laptop with an old fountain pen laid across its closed lid, like a single stem laid on a grave. I had wanted to be a writer once. It was the first thing I gave up. I had set the manuscript in a drawer and taken a teaching job because teaching was steady and a young family was not cheap, and then someday had become later, and later had become a soft ache. I did not take out and look at very often. Daniel had always supported that old dream in the quiet way he supported everything without ever quite understanding it, and here it was given back to me in a room built entirely around it. He had not just remembered. He had built a cathedral to the part of me I had let go dark. Before I could take another step, gravel crackled under tires outside. Through the front window, I watched a black SUV roll to a stop behind my rental car. 3 men got out. Even from that distance, I could see the family in them. The same tall frame Daniel had carried, the same set of the shoulders, though on these men it had hardened into something else. I had never met my husband's brothers. He had shown me one faded photograph years ago and had put it away before I could ask a single question. Now they were here, and they had not come to welcome the widow to Montana. I stepped back from the window and turned the deadbolt. My hands were steadier than I expected. Some animal part of me had already decided that whatever these men wanted, I would learn it on my own terms and not theirs. The oldest of them, a silver-haired man who looked like Daniel would have looked if Daniel had ever learned to be cruel, came up the porch steps and knocked hard on the door. "Mrs. Calloway," he called through the wood. "We know you are in there. I am Warren Daniel's brother. These are Preston and Grady. We only want to talk." I did not answer. I moved instead to the desk, sat down in Daniel's chair, and opened the laptop. The screen woke and asked for a password. I typed the date we had met a summer afternoon in 1990 when I had dropped an armful of library books and a shy man in a corduroy jacket had knelt to help me gather them, and then I typed my maiden name, Vale. The screen accepted it at once and opened onto a single folder labeled in Daniel's careful lettering, for Kendra. Inside were dozens of video files. They were not named by date, but by moment. Watch this first. Watch this when they come. Watch this when you are angry with me. Watch this when you find the study. I sat very still, the knocking still going at my back, and clicked the one that said, "Watch this first." Daniel's face filled the screen and I made a sound I could not help. It was not the thin gray man of his last months. This was Daniel, healthy Daniel with color in his cheeks, sitting in this very great room with the books behind him. He smiled that slightly crooked smile that had undone me for 34 years. "Hello, Kendra," he said. "If you are watching this, then I am gone and you came to the farm anyway, despite all my years of making you promise not to." He gave a soft laugh. "I should have known you would not be able to resist once Harlan told you it existed. You never could leave a locked door alone. That was one of the 10,000 things I loved about you." I touched the edge of the screen as if I could touch him. "I owe you the truth," he said, "and I want to give it to you in the right order. So I will start with the hardest part. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It is a thickening of the heart muscle, and it runs in my family. My father had it. The doctors told me I had somewhere between 2 and 5 years. He looked down for a moment, then back up. "I chose not to tell you. I chose not to tell Sloan. I did not want either of you watching a clock over my shoulder for the rest of my life. I did not want pity at the dinner table. I wanted to spend whatever I had left living with you, not dying in front of you." Anger and grief rose in me at the same time, tangled so tightly I could not have separated one from the other. He had made a decision about my own life without me. He had taken from me the chance to hold his hand, knowing to say the things you say when you know. And yet, even as the anger burned, some part of me understood exactly why the gentlest man I ever knew had done the gentlest, most maddening thing. "I know you are angry," he said as if he were in the room, as if he could see me. "You have every right to be. But when I got that diagnosis, I decided to use the time I had to build something that would outlast me. You always talked about the writing you set aside. So I found the last place on earth anyone who knew me would expect me to go. The farm I ran from when I was 19 and swore I would never see again." He leaned toward the camera, and his voice grew quiet and serious. "Kendra, my brothers will come. They never wanted this land when it was worthless. They mocked me for buying it. But rare earth was found in the county 18 months ago, and suddenly the dirt they laughed at is worth more than everything they own. They will try to take it from you, and they will not be gentle, and they will not be honest. In the bottom drawer of this desk, there is a blue folder. Everything you need to prove the farm is yours is inside it. I made certain of it." The knocking had stopped. Through the window, I saw the 3 men conferring by their vehicle, and Preston, the middle brother, was pulling a document from a leather folder. "Whatever you decide to do with this place, keep it or sell it is entirely yours to choose," Daniel said. "I did not build it to be a burden. I built it to be a door." He smiled once more. "That is enough for today. Watch the next one tomorrow. I love you, Kendra. Until then." The video froze on his face. I sat for a moment with my hand over my mouth, and then I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and found the blue folder exactly where he had said it would be, thick, with certified copies, notarized statements, and clean bank records. I had barely closed the drawer when my phone rang. "Sloan." I answered on the second ring. "Sloan." "Mom." Her voice was tight, and under the tightness I could hear that she had been crying. And under the crying I could hear something worse, which was doubt. "Why didn't you tell me about Dad's farm? Why didn't you tell me about the minerals? His brothers just called me. They said there might be a fair settlement for all of us if I helped them, that Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end. What is going on?" They had reached my daughter before I had even finished watching one video. The speed of it took my breath, and then it did something else. It lit a small, hard flame somewhere behind my sternum, protective and furious. They were not only coming for me, they were reaching for my grieving girl who had lost her father 8 weeks ago and had not yet found solid ground to stand on. "Sloan, listen to me," I said, and I kept my voice as level as I could. "I will explain all of it. But right now I need you to promise me something. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything on the phone. These men are not your friends, no matter how kind they sound. If there's money, Mom, real money we should at least." She stopped. I could hear her wavering, torn between the mother she had drifted from and 3 strangers offering her a doorway back to her dead father. "This is not about money," I said, and I surprised myself with how sure I sounded. "This is about what your father wanted. Please, trust me one more time." Or there was a long silence on the line and then a shaky breath. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, but you call me back tonight. You tell me everything." "I promise," I said. And I meant it more than I had meant anything in weeks. I had just ended the call when a new vehicle came up the lane, a county sheriff's truck, its tires loud on the gravel. The 3 brothers watched it approach with the satisfied expressions of men who believed they had brought reinforcements. A deputy climbed out. Young unhurried, settling his hat as he took in the house and the cars and the widow now standing in the open doorway with a blue folder in her hands. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Deputy Ray Sutton. These gentlemen asked me to come out. They say there's a dispute over the property, and they'd like to inspect it." Warren stepped forward smoothly, the way a man steps forward when he is used to rooms rearranging themselves around him. "Deputy, this is a delicate family matter. Our brother recently passed, and his widow is understandably emotional and not entirely clear on the situation. We only want to see the family land." "I am neither emotional nor unclear," I said, and I was pleased to find that it was true. "My name is Kendra Calloway. I am Daniel Calloway's wife of 34 years, and this is my property." I turned to the deputy and held out the folder. "Before anyone sets foot inside, I would ask you to look at these." Deputy Sutton took the folder and paged through it without hurry. Warren kept talking something about generations and legacy and the way things were meant to be shared, but the deputy was reading, and the longer he read, the quieter the porch became. At last he closed the folder and handed it back to me. "These look to be in order, ma'am," he said. "Clear title held in trust. Notarized." He turned to the brothers, and his tone did not change, but something behind it did. "Gentlemen, do you have a court order authorizing entry?" "We have filed an objection," Preston said quickly and produced his document, which the deputy scanned and returned. "That's a filing, sir," Deputy Sutton said. "It's not an order, and it doesn't let you into a woman's home. If you believe you have a claim to this property, that's a matter for the civil courts, not for me, and not for today." He touched the brim of his hat toward me. "Ma'am," and then to the brothers, "I'll follow you out to the gate." Warren's smile fell away entirely, and for one moment I saw the thing underneath it hard and cold and patient. "This is not finished, Kendra," he said. "No," I said. "I don't suppose it is." I stood on the porch and watched the black SUV disappear down the lane behind the deputy's truck, the dust rising gold in the last of the light, and then settling slowly back onto the road. The man I had loved for 34 years had kept secrets from me, some of them painful, some of them so beautiful I did not yet have the words. And he had known somehow that this exact afternoon would come. He had left me a folder and a key and a face on a screen that still called me by name. I went back inside, closed the door on the cooling evening, and sat down again at his desk. Tomorrow there would be another video and another piece of him, and another piece of whatever fight was coming. But the first skirmish was mine. I had not run. I looked at the wall of books he had built for the woman I used to be, and for the first time since the coffee stopped dripping on an ordinary Tuesday, I felt something in me that was not fog. It felt almost like the beginning of a spine. I did not sleep much that first night in the farmhouse. I lay in the wide bed in a room that Daniel had clearly furnished with me in mind, a reading lamp on the nightstand, and a stack of novels on the shelf that were all my favorites, and I listened to a house that was not yet mine, settling in the cold. Toward dawn, I gave up on sleep and went walking through the property while the light was still gray and the grass was stiff with frost. The place was even larger than it had looked from the gate. Behind the main house lay a restored barn, a long greenhouse where rows of herbs and late vegetables stood in careful order, and a smaller building with tall north windows that I did not yet have the courage to open. Beyond the outbuildings, the land opened into pasture, and past the pasture the ground grew rough and rocky as it climbed toward a line of low foothills in the west. Even a stranger could see that the eastern acres were the good ones, flat and green and easy, and that the western acres were the kind of land a person would drive past without a second look. "Good morning, ma'am." The voice came from the direction of the barn, and I turned to find a man in his early 60s wiping his hands on a rag. He had a weathered, careful face and the still way of moving that some men learn only after life has taught them to take up less space. "I am Hank," he said. "Hank Mercer. Your husband hired me to look after the place." "Kendra Calloway," I said, and shook his hand, "though I suspect you already knew that." He nodded, and a small, kind smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Mr. Calloway talked about you more than he talked about anything else. He said you had a way of seeing straight through people. Said it made you a fine teacher and an even better judge of character." He looked at me for a moment as if measuring the truth of it, and then he seemed satisfied. "You knew him well," I said. It came out as half a question. "As well as he let anyone know him," Hank said. "He was here most every month for 3 years, and the last 6 months more than that. He did not delegate a single decision if he could help it. Toward the end, he worked like a man racing a clock that only he could hear. I did not understand it then. He glanced at me, and I understood that he did now. I asked him whether Daniel had ever spoken of his health, and a shadow crossed the older man's face. Not in words, he said, but he pushed harder those last months. Added rooms to the plans. Ordered books by the crate. Planted that greenhouse when a sensible man his age would have been slowing down. It was like he was trying to finish a letter before the light went out. We stood together in the frost while the sun came up over the eastern pasture, and Hank told me without my asking the thing I most needed to hear and most dreaded. "Your husband saved my life," he said simply. "I did time, Mrs. Calloway. Years of it for things I am not proud of. When I came out, nobody would give a man like me a job. Your husband did. He handed me keys to a property worth more than everything I would ever earn, and he never once looked at me like I was a risk. So whatever you need out here, you have it. I owe him more than I can pay, and by my way of counting, that debt passes to you." I did not know what to say to that, so I said thank you, and I meant it, and we left it there. That morning's video was waiting for me on the desk when I came back inside. Daniel appeared on the screen, seated in the great room, the books rising behind him, and he told me good morning, as if he could see the frost still melting on my boots. "Today I want to show you something," he said, and the camera moved as he carried it down a hallway I had not yet explored, stopping in front of a closed door. "This room is for you alone," he said. "The key is in the top drawer of the nightstand, the small silver one with the fountain pen engraved on the handle." I paused the video and went and found the key exactly where he had said it would be. Then I walked back down the hallway to the door at the end of the east wing, a plain door I might have passed 100 times, and I fit the silver key into the lock and turned it. It was a writing study. A real one, the kind I had daydreamed about in the years when daydreaming was all I let myself do. Tall north windows filled the room with the even shadowless light that painters and writers both hunger for. There was a broad desk and a good chair and a typewriter that was not for use but for looking at the exact model I had learned on as a girl. There were reams of paper and rows of fountain pens, and on the shelves the reference books and the dictionaries and the worn paperbacks that had taught me to love sentences. I stood in the doorway and could not make myself go in, because going in felt like admitting how badly I had wanted this and how long I had gone without it. The video went on in my hand. "There is one more thing," Daniel said. "Look in the cabinet beneath the window seat." I crossed to the cushioned seat below the northern windows, knelt, and opened the low cabinet built into the wall. Inside lay a flat archival box. I lifted the lid, and then I sat down hard on the floor because I could not trust my legs. My manuscript. The novel I had written in my 20s and abandoned in a drawer, the one I was certain had been lost in one of our moves decades ago. And beneath it, in neat archival sleeves, the short stories I had written in college, the ones I thought no longer existed anywhere in the world. Daniel had kept them. For more than 30 years he had carried them from house to house, without a word, protected from damp and light, waiting for a room like this one to give them back to me. On top of the stack lay a single page in his hand. "She is still in there, Kendra," it read. "The woman who wrote these. I gave her the room. The rest is up to her." I do not know how long I sat on the floor of that study with my old sentences in my lap and my husband's handwriting pressed to my chest. Long enough that when the sound of tires on gravel finally reached me, the light through the windows had shifted. I got up and looked out, and my heart dropped because 2 vehicles were coming up the lane. The black SUV I already knew, and behind it a silver sedan I did not. And out of the sedan stepped my daughter, and she was already walking toward her uncle's with her hand out. I went out to meet them because there was nothing else to do. Sloane embraced me, but it was a brief, careful embrace, the kind you give someone you are not sure you are still on the same side as. She looked pale and tired, and 33 years old, and utterly lost. And for a moment I saw her at 6, at 10, at 16, all the daughters she had been standing inside the woman she was now. "Mom, this place is unbelievable," she said, looking past me at the house. "Why would Dad hide something like this?" Warren stepped forward with the smoothness of a man who has closed 1,000 deals. "Kendra, I think we started badly. We were caught off guard, same as you. We would like a fresh conversation as a family." I did not answer him. I kept my eyes on my daughter. "Sloane, I said we agreed you would talk to me before you talked with them. They called again this morning," she said, and her chin came up in the old stubborn way. "They were kind. They have stories about Dad as a boy, photos I have never seen." She hesitated. "And they made an offer that sounds fair, Mom. A third to you, a third to me, a third to them. We could sell it all and walk away, and Dad's family stays whole. Family I said that you did not know existed a week ago. Only because Dad kept them from us, she shot back. And there it was, the wedge they had driven, the doubt that turns grief into a weapon. What else did he hide? Doesn't it bother you at all? It did bother me. That was the trap of it. He had hidden his illness, hidden the farm, hidden the whole architecture of his final years. But I had begun to understand that his secrets were made of love, and theirs would be made of something else. And I was not going to let 3 men I had met the day before decide which was which for my daughter. Your father had reasons for the distance he kept from these men, I said carefully. I am asking you to wait until you know them before you sign your name to anything. Preston opened his leather folder and slid a document toward me across the porch rail, all easy confidence and courtroom calm. This is a generous settlement, Kendra. It honors Daniel's memory and the family's history with the land. There is really nothing to lose by considering it. I did not take the paper. I think I said that it is time for all of you to go. And then to Sloane more gently, except you. You are always welcome here. She looked torn nearly in half, and in the end she chose the version of grief that felt like a door back to her father. I'm going to go with them for now, she said. We have more to talk about. She kissed my cheek quickly, the way you kiss someone you are not ready to forgive. Think about the offer, Mom. Please. I watched the 2 vehicles go down the lane together, and the hollow place under my ribs opened wide. In a single day, they had done what Daniel had spent a lifetime preventing. They had gotten a foot inside my daughter. Hank was standing by the barn when I turned around, his hat in his hands, and he had the look of a man who had decided something. Mrs. Calloway, he said, there is something your husband asked me not to show you unless it came to this. I believe it has come to this. He glanced toward the lane where the dust was still settling. We should walk. There are things best not talked about inside 4 walls that might have ears. He led me past the barn and the greenhouse and out across the pasture toward the rough western ground, and as we walked, he told me the rest of it. The brothers had been here before, he said. More than a year ago, when the first word of rare earth reached the county. They had shown up unannounced while Daniel was supervising the last of the restoration, and they had not recognized him at first because he had grown a beard during his treatment and thinned to a stranger. He had watched them from a distance. My husband and he had listened to them talk about the worthless dirt their fool of a brother had bought, and then he had left without letting them see his face. That night, Hank said he changed the plans. Starting with what I am about to show you. At the base of the western foothills stood a small stone building I had taken for a ruin. It was an old SA office, Hank explained, left over from a mine that had failed a century ago and been forgotten. Daniel had restored it quietly and thought about it. Inside, behind a heavy door and a wall of shelving that swung aside on a hidden hinge, was a windowless room that my husband had built into the hillside itself. Hank flipped a switch and the lights came up on filing cabinets, a desk with a computer and walls papered with maps and documents. Your husband called it his workroom, Hank said. I called it something else. He collected everything in here, everything about his brothers, and everything about what this land is really worth. I went to the largest map on the wall, a detailed geological survey that showed not only Larkspur Hollow, but the neighboring properties for miles marked in red where the deposits ran with dates and depths and notes in Daniel's small, precise hand. And I understood standing there the shape of what he had done. The largest deposit, Hank said, coming to stand beside me, is not under the eastern acres where the surveyors have been sniffing around. It is here. He tapped the western foothills, the rough, rocky ground the brothers had so generously offered to leave out of their fair division. Your husband hired 3 separate geology teams and swore every one of them to secrecy. They all found the same thing. The formation runs deeper and stranger than the company men expected, and it sits mostly under the land nobody would look at twice. So the farm is worth even more than his brothers think, I said. Far more, Hank said. And that is not all. He opened a filing cabinet and drew out a thick folder. Your husband spent 3 years documenting how his brothers make their money. Warren runs a private equity fund in Denver. There are investor accounts that do not add up money moved where it was not supposed to go. Preston helped paper it over. There is a pattern here going back years, and a good part of it is recent enough to still matter to the people whose job it is to care about such things. I paged through it. Account statements. Emails, sworn declarations from former employees, all of it organized with the same care Daniel brought to everything he touched. On the desk beneath the map sat a framed photograph I had never seen. Daniel is a boy of perhaps 15, thin and serious, holding a stack of composition notebooks against his chest as if they were something precious and breakable. "That is your husband at 15, Hank said quietly. "He wrote stories in those notebooks, filled dozens of them. He told me once that writing was the only thing in that house that was ever truly his. His brothers found them one winter when he was away, and they burned every last one in the yard and laughed while they did it. Said it would teach him to stop putting on airs." I stood very still, holding the photograph, and a great many things I had never understood about my gentle husband quietly rearranged themselves. His endless patience with my old dream, the room full of books, the study with the northern light, the manuscript he had carried through 30 years and 4 houses. He had not just been giving me a gift. He had been reaching back across half a century to save something his brothers had tried to destroy, and he had chosen to save it in me. "What do I do now?" I said half to myself. "That depends," Hank said, "on what you want. You could sell the whole thing, minerals and all, and walk away richer than you can spend and maybe lose your daughter to those men forever. You could fight them in court with what is in this room and probably win and burn the family down to the roots doing it." He paused. "Or you could do the thing your husband did best. Think 3 moves ahead and find the path nobody is watching." I looked at the photograph of the serious boy with his notebooks, and I felt the plan begin to assemble itself piece by piece the way a sentence assembles when you finally stop forcing it. "Hank," I said, "does the laptop with his videos work out here?" "There is a secure network across the whole property," he said. He made sure of it. "Good," I said. "I need to watch the next several videos tonight, not one a day. And then I'm going to need your help arranging some meetings. First with my daughter alone away from her uncles, then with a lawyer." And then I looked back at the wall of red marks on the western foothills. "I think I would like to sit down with the mineral companies myself." Hank smiled for the first time since we had entered the room. That, he said, is a plan Mr. Calloway would have liked. I watched a week of Daniel's videos that night, one after another in the glow of the desk lamp, and in them I found the rest of the map. "They will try to divide you," he warned in one as if he were watching the very thing unfold. "Warren will be the warm one. Preston will be the threat in a suit. Grady will stand behind them and say nothing and be the one who feels the guilt if any of them do. And they will go through Sloan because grief has left her a door standing open." In another video, he walked the western foothills with the camera and showed me the worthless-looking ground, and told me it was worth everything because no one ever looks closely at what appears to be nothing. 2 days later, I met my daughter at a small cafe in Marlow, 20 miles from the farm on ground that belonged to neither of us. She came 15 minutes late with her guard already up. "I can't stay long," she said before she had even sat down. "Warren is taking me to meet the family attorney this afternoon." "Warren," I said. "You are on a first-name basis after 4 days." "They have been kind," she said, "and there was an edge under it when nobody else has bothered." I let that sit for a moment because it deserved to be felt. Then I said, "Do you remember the art history class you took your 2nd year of college? The professor who talked about perspective. How where you stand changes everything you can see." "What does that have to do with anything she said?" "You have only stood in one place," I said. "I want you to stand in your father's." I reached into my bag and took out a tablet and set it on the table between us. "He left something for you, Sloan. Not just for me. For you." Her face changed. "What is it?" "Your father made videos before he died. Hundreds of them. He knew he was sick for 3 years, and he never told us because he could not bear to make us watch him go. I found one with your name on it. I want you to hear this from him, and not from me." She stared at the tablet as if it might bite her. Then, with a hand that had begun to shake, she pressed play, and her father's face filled the screen, healthy and smiling and gone. "Hello, my brilliant girl," he said. And my daughter made a sound I had not heard from her since she was small. He told her he was sorry. He told her he had been selfish and human and afraid, and that he had wanted their last years to be ordinary instead of shadowed. And then he told her the thing he had never told either of us. When I was 19, he said my brothers took the inheritance our father left me. They forged my name on documents while I was away at school, and when I found out and threatened to go to the police, they told me they would swear I had been part of it from the start. I had no money and no proof and no one who would believe the youngest against the 3 of them. So I left. I changed the shape of my whole life, and I never looked back, and I built something clean and good with your mother, and it was worth every single thing I walked away from. "Whatever my brothers are telling you now," he said, and his gentle face went hard in a way I had rarely seen, "remember that they have wanted this family's land for one reason, and it is not love. It is the same reason they wanted everything, and they will use anyone to get it, even you. The video ended on his frozen face, and my daughter sat with tears running down her cheeks, and did not wipe them. "He was protecting us," she whispered. "The whole time." "Yes," I said, and reached across the table to take her hand, and this time she let me. "They lied to me," she said, and I could hear the grief hardening into something more useful. "About all of it. Not about everything," I said. "The land is worth a fortune. That part is true. But they did not tell you that the richest ground is under the western acres they conveniently left out of their generous offer. And they did not tell you what your father spent 3 years learning about how they make their money." Sloane wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she looked up, she was her father's daughter again. All that quick, sharp mind pointed in a new direction. "What's the plan?" she said. "First I said we are going to see my lawyer. Not the family attorney your uncles want to use. Someone your father chose for exactly this years before it happened. Maggie Doyle turned out to be a small, precise woman with a gray bob and a way of listening that made you feel she was already 3 questions ahead of you. Daniel had retained her quietly and left her a letter of his own. When I laid out what I had found in the assay office and what I intended to do, she took off her glasses and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Calloway," she said finally, "your husband told me you would surprise me. He was not exaggerating." She put her glasses back on. "Let me make sure you understand your position, because it is stronger than you think. The farm passed to you through a living trust, which means it is not part of the probated estate. His brothers are not your husband's heirs. He had a wife and a daughter, and under the law, that means his siblings inherit nothing and have no standing to speak of. Their claim that he lacked capacity is close to frivolous. A heart condition is not a mental defect, and your husband ran his affairs and signed his documents with clear eyes and good witnesses." She tapped the folder from the mine, which lay closed on her desk. "This changes the tenor of things considerably, but I want to be careful with it, and I want you to be careful too. We do not trade silence for anything. We do not offer to bury a crime. We simply make it very clear that their claim is dead, that continuing it invites a kind of scrutiny they cannot afford, and we let them draw the obvious conclusion. Do you understand the difference?" "I understand it," I said. "My husband would have insisted on it." Then Maggie said, and a small, dangerous smile touched her mouth, "Let us give your brothers-in-law a morning they will not forget." They came to Larkspur Hollow at 10 o'clock on a bright, cold Thursday, exactly as I knew they would, the black SUV crunching up the lane with the confidence of men who believed the outcome was already decided. Behind them came a second car, and out of it stepped a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who could only be an executive. I watched from the great room window, dressed not in the clothes of a grieving widow, but in a tailored charcoal suit I had bought in town for this exact morning, because appearances matter when you are staging a reversal. And I intended for them to meet the woman my husband had always known me to be. "They're here," I said to Sloane, who stood beside me in a dark blue dress, with her father's watch on her wrist. "Ready?" she asked, nerves and steel warring in her voice. "Completely," I said, and squeezed her hand. "Let them talk themselves into the corner first." Hank showed them into the dining room, where I had arranged a long table with documents at every place and a screen waiting at the far end. Warren led Preston behind him with his folder, Grady trailing with his eyes on the floor. The silver-haired man was introduced as Harold Vance, chief executive of Meridian Resource Group, brought along Warren, said to lend the discussion some industry expertise. They had brought a mineral company to a family meeting to frighten me with numbers. It was almost touching how sure they were. "Please sit," I said, and remained standing at the head of the table. "Before we begin, I would like to thank you for your earlier offer. It was very educational." Warren smiled, mistaking that for surrender, and began to say something about being reasonable. And I picked up the remote from the table and pressed the button, and a screen descended from the ceiling at the far end of the room. The brothers exchanged a glance. They had not expected a woman who came prepared. "If you would direct your attention here," I said, and brought up the full survey of Larkspur Hollow, all of it, every acre. "This is the complete property, not the eastern parcel your offer so generously concerned itself with. All of it." I clicked again, and the map of the deposits overlaid the land, the red running thick and unmistakable under the western foothills. "As you can see, the richest ground by a wide margin lies beneath exactly the acres you offered to exclude from our fair division." Harold Vance straightened in his chair, his professional mask slipping as he leaned toward the screen, and I watched a man who had been brought to intimidate me begin very quietly to do arithmetic. "Those surveys are unreliable," Warren said, and there was the first crack in his voice. They were verified by 3 independent teams, said a new voice from the connecting door, which opened to admit a lean, unhurried man in a gray suit, followed by Maggie Doyle. "This is Tom Bishop," I said, Chief Executive of Cascade Ridge Minerals, Meridian's principal competitor. Mr. Bishop reviewed the complete geological data my husband compiled, and he has expressed a great deal of interest in the honest version of this property. Vance turned slowly to look at the brothers. "You told me you held exclusive rights to negotiate here," he said. "They do not?" Maggie said, and set her own documents on the table. "Mrs. Calloway holds clear, uncontested title to the entire property, mineral rights included, through a trust that passes outside the estate. As Daniel Calloway's siblings with a surviving spouse and daughter, these gentlemen are not heirs and have no standing to contest anything. The competency claim is without merit, and I am prepared to have it dismissed." She let that settle, then added quietly, "And to the brothers alone, there are also matters in Mr. Calloway's records regarding certain accounts at your fund that we are under no obligation to keep to ourselves. I would think very carefully, gentlemen, about how much daylight you want on this." Harold Vance stood up. "I believe he said that my company's involvement here has been based on information that was incomplete and possibly worse." He looked at the brothers with open disgust. "Mrs. Calloway, I will be in touch directly if you will have me." And he walked out. Warren's face had gone the color of ash. Preston had stopped reaching for his folder, and Grady, the youngest, the one who felt things would not lift his eyes from the table. "You have no idea what you're doing," Warren said, but there was no force left in it. "The extraction costs on that western formation alone." "Actually," Tom Bishop said mildly, "Cascade Ridge has developed methods suited to exactly this kind of formation, and we are prepared to make Mrs. Calloway an offer that reflects both the difficulty and the extraordinary promise of it." He inclined his head toward me. "On terms of her choosing." "They talk to my mother with respect," Sloane said then, speaking for the first time, her voice steady and clear, "or they don't talk to her at all. And for what it's worth, I know what you did to my father when he was 19. He told me himself in his own voice. There is nothing you can offer me that is worth more than hearing him say it." 2 hours later, the Calloway brothers signed the settlement Maggie had prepared in advance, a full withdrawal of their claim, and they drove down the lane for what I hoped would be the last time, defeated and exposed and quiet at last. Hank stood beside me on the porch as the dust rose gold and settled slowly back onto the road. "Your husband would be proud," he said. "You beat them the way he always believed you would." I watched the road until it was empty. I felt the strange double weight of it, triumph and grief, pressing on the same spot. "We're not finished," I said, thinking of the videos still waiting on the desk, and of the winter that was coming, and of some instinct I could not yet name that told me these men did not lose so much as retreat. But it was a battle we had won with the weapons my husband had spent his last good years preparing, and with the spine I was only beginning to believe was mine. The weeks after the brothers signed their withdrawal passed in a blur of ordinary necessary things. There were papers to finalize and calls to return, and the slow work of learning a house that was still teaching me where the light fell at each hour of the day. Sloane stayed with me through most of it, and something between us that had gone brittle over the last few years began very slowly to soften back into shape. We fell into a habit of watching one of her father's videos together over breakfast, and in those quiet mornings, the 3 of us were in a strange and lovely way. A family again, my daughter across the table and my husband on the screen, and me in the middle holding both. When I sat down at last with Cascade Ridge Minerals, I surprised their negotiators. Most landowners, they told me later, sell the mineral rights outright for a single enormous check and never think about the ground again. I did not want that. I told Tom Bishop that the oil and metal had been under that hill for longer than there had been people to fight over it, and that it could stay there a while longer until we agreed on a way to take it out that I could live with. I insisted on responsible methods, on strict limits, on a substantial fund set aside in advance to restore the land after the deposit was gone. His lead negotiator called my terms highly unusual. Then perhaps the business needs more unusual terms, I said, and to my surprise, Tom Bishop laughed not unkindly and said that Daniel had told him once that his wife had studied conservation before she ever studied literature, and that she would insist on doing this the right way or not at all. It was one more thing my husband had known about me and set in motion before I ever arrived, one more quiet hand on the wheel. One gray morning, I finally let myself go into the writing study and stay. I sat down at the broad desk under the northern windows, and I looked for a long time at the old typewriter and the rows of pens, and I did not write anything at all. I just sat there letting myself want it, which I had not allowed in 30 years. That was the day Sloane came to find me with the laptop in her hands and a strange expression on her face. "This one is different, Mom," she said. "It is marked for when you start writing again. I think you should watch it alone." She left me the computer and closed the door softly, and I pressed play. Daniel appeared in the empty room before any of the shelves had been filled, the northern light falling on his face the way it was falling on mine now. "Hello, my love," he said. "If you are watching this, then you found your way back to the room, which means you are ready or nearly ready to find your way back to the page." He smiled. "I have been thinking about legacy. Everyone thinks legacy is money or children or a name carved somewhere. But there is another kind, Kendra. It is what you make possible in the people you love." He gestured at the bare room around him. "I cannot see this room finished except in my mind, but I can see you in it. I can see you at this desk with a pen in your hand, finally writing the things you have been carrying quietly for as long as I have known you." I put my hand flat against the desk to steady myself. "I have arranged everything so that you would have the freedom to do it," he went on. "The farm, the trust, the income from the ground, all of it, so you would never again have to choose between the practical thing and the true thing. But what you do with that freedom is not for me to decide. The farm and the books and this room, they are not the inheritance. They are only the tools. The inheritance is possibility, the chance to become more of yourself without anything standing in the way." He leaned toward the camera. "I have one request, and you are free to refuse it. On the shelf in the closet behind this room, there is a blank journal bound in leather waiting. When you are truly ready, I hope you will fill it. Not with what you see out these windows, but with what you feel about this place that gave me back my beginning and will carry you into whatever comes next." He gave his crooked smile one more time. "Until tomorrow, my love." I sat with that for a long while. Then I got up and opened the closet, and there on the shelf lay the journal bound in soft brown leather, its pages empty and waiting. I did not write in it that day, but I carried it to the desk and set it where I would see it every morning, and that was its own kind of beginning. Winter came down on Larkspur Hollow with a beauty that stopped the breath. Snow lay clean and unbroken across the pastures, ice traced the windows in the mornings, and wood smoke rose straight up from the stone chimney into a sky so cold and blue it looked scoured. I decided to stay through the season rather than go back to Minnesota. I wanted to know this land in all its weathers, to earn it by living through its hardest months. And there was something in me that had begun to write in that leather journal at last, a page here and a page there, that did not want to be interrupted. Sloane had gone back to Denver by then. Her firm would not extend her leave any longer, and life, the ordinary insistent kind, was calling her home. But we kept our ritual across the distance, the two of us and Daniel's recorded voice connected now by a video call each morning, her in her bright apartment kitchen, and me by the fire with the snow at the windows, and my husband speaking to us both from a year in the past. It was on one of those winter mornings that the phone rang out of its usual hour, and it was Sloane, and her voice was wrong. "Mom," she said, "I had a strange visit. Uncle Grady came to see me." Everything in me went still. Grady, what did he want? "He said he came to apologize," she said. "For everything, for the way they used me. And maybe part of him meant it." "Mom, he seemed genuinely ashamed, but the whole time he kept steering the conversation. How often did I visit the farm? Had I noticed anything unusual out there lately? Whether you were alone?" She paused. It didn't feel like an apology. It felt like someone taking measurements. "Did you tell him anything I asked?" "Nothing," she said. I kept it vague. "But there's more. He let it slip that Warren has been very sick, some serious condition. He made it sound like a plea, like family should come together when one of us is dying." I looked out at the white pastures and felt the cold come off the glass. The brothers had been too quiet for too long. Men like that do not simply accept a loss. They wait and they look for the new angle, and they come again when they think you have let your guard down. "Be careful with him, Sloane," I said. "It may be exactly what it looks like, a frightened man reaching for his family. Or it may be one more approach. Either way, do not let anyone talk you into being anything but honest with me. I hate this," she said quietly. "I hate having to wonder about everyone who shares Dad's blood." "I know," I said. So did he. That evening I put on my coat and walked out through the snow to the old assay office at the foot of the Western Hills, and I opened the hidden room, and I went looking for whatever my husband might have left for exactly this. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a folder I had not opened before labeled in his careful hand, "If they come back." Inside was a contingency plan laid out step by step, contacts filings already drafted the names of people who could help. And clipped to the back of it was a sealed envelope addressed simply to Warren with a note in Daniel's writing across the front. A last resort. Only if there is no other way. I held that envelope for a long time in the cold quiet of the room he had built, and I did not open it because he had asked me not to, and because whatever was inside had frightened my husband enough that he had sealed it and buried it and told me to use it only at the end of everything. I put it in my coat pocket and walked back through the snow to the house, and I did not sleep well that night. They came 3 days later. Hank saw the vehicles first and came to the door with a grim face. "All 3 of them," he said, "and 2 men I do not know. One of them is carrying a doctor's bag." I called Maggie Doyle, who said she would drive out at once and that I was to let no one pass the front room until she arrived. I called Sloan and told her to stay exactly where she was in Denver, because if this was a trap, it was meant to gather both of us in one place. And then, while I waited for Maggie, I did the one thing my husband had taught me to do above all others. I got ready. When the doorbell rang, I had the sealed letter in my pocket, and Maggie Doyle at my side, having made it out along the plowed road with 10 minutes to spare. I let them in myself. Warren entered first, and the sight of him silenced whatever hard thing I had prepared to say. He was thinner than I had ever seen him gray beneath his winter tan, moving with the careful economy of a man whose body has become a thing he negotiates with. Behind him came Preston and Grady, and then 2 strangers, one plainly a doctor and one plainly a lawyer. Kendra Warren said, and even his voice had lost its edge. "Thank you for seeing us." "Family arrives unannounced," I said, and gestured for them to sit. "Before we begin, I want you to know that Ms. Doyle is here as my counsel, and that I will be recording this conversation. In Montana, everyone at the table has a right to know that, so now you know it." Warren did not object. He sat down heavily and folded his hands, and I saw that whatever he had come to ask it had cost him something to come and ask it. "I will be direct," he said. "I have end-stage kidney failure. My kidneys have quit, and without a transplant, I have months. The doctors can keep me on dialysis for a while, but that is not living, and it is not forever." He gestured to the man with the medical bag. "This is Dr. Kettner, my nephrologist. Our family carries an unusual tissue type. It makes finding a match difficult. The best odds by far come from relatives." A cold suspicion was already taking shape in me, and so I said, "And so Warren said we came to ask whether Sloan would agree to be tested. Just blood work at first, to see if she could be a living donor." The audacity of it went through me like cold water. After everything, after the manipulation and the lies and the reaching for my grieving daughter through her father's grave, they had come to ask for a piece of her body. I looked at the 3 of them, at the dying man and his careful brothers, and I kept my voice level for the sake of the recording and for the sake of my own dignity. "Let me be sure I understand," I said. "You tried to take this land from me. You tried to turn my daughter against me. And now you are here to ask whether she will undergo surgery to save your life." "I know how it sounds," Warren said, and to his credit, he did not look away. "But we are still blood, Kendra. That has to count for something." Before I could answer, Maggie Doyle spoke quiet and precise. "Mr. Calloway, I want to make sure your understanding is complete since you have raised it. A living relative is one path, but it is not the only one, and it is not medically required. There is the National Transplant Waiting List. There are paired donation programs where incompatible pairs are matched with other pairs across the country. Your brother has options that do not involve pressuring a grieving young woman who is not even in this room to speak for herself. I say this so that no one here mistakes a request for a necessity." The doctor shifted uncomfortably but did not contradict her because she was right, and he knew it. "Why not Preston?" I asked, "or Grady? Brothers are usually the best odds of all." Dr. Kettner cleared his throat. "Both gentlemen were tested," he said. "Neither is compatible. There are some unusual factors in this family's genetics. And there are no other relatives," I asked, watching all 3 of their faces very carefully. "No one else who might be a match." Something passed between the brothers, then quick and guilty, a current under still water. Grady looked at the window. "No," Warren said too firmly. "No one else." I took the sealed envelope from my pocket and held it where he could see it, and I watched the recognition and the fear cross his gray face at once. "Your brother left this for you," I said, "with instructions that I give it to you only if there was no other way. I believe that is where we are." Warren stared at it. "Daniel wrote to me. He anticipated this, I said. He anticipated all of it. And I held it a moment longer because I wanted him to understand that it was mine to give and not his to demand, and then I placed it in his shaking hand. He broke the seal and unfolded the pages, and I watched my husband's dead hand reach across a year and change the color of his brother's face. Warren read, and the confidence that illness had not yet stripped from him drained away line by line, until what sat in my dining room was not a powerful man at all, but an old one confronting something buried so long he had forgotten the shape of the ground above it. When he finally looked up, his voice had gone to gravel. "How long have you known?" he asked me. "I only know he left it for you," I said. "What did he write?" Warren handed the pages to Preston, who read them with Grady leaning over his shoulder, and I watched all three faces travel the same road from confusion to disbelief to something close to horror. "This cannot be true," Preston said. "Father would have told us." "Would he?" Warren said and laughed a bitter, broken sound. "The same father who set us against each other our whole lives, who kept every secret like a knife he might need later. Someone," I said quietly, "is going to have to tell me what my husband wrote." Warren looked at me as though remembering I was there. "Our mother," he said, "did not die giving birth to Daniel. That is the story we were raised on. That she died bringing him into the world, and it was why Father could never quite look at him. According to this, she did not die at all. She left. She fled Father because he was a violent man when Daniel was still an infant, and Father told the world she had died in childbirth to bury the shame of being left and to punish her by erasing her completely. He blamed the baby for a death that never happened. He passed that down to us like an inheritance, and we took it." The room was very still. Sloane was not there to hear it, and I was glad because it was almost too much sorrow for one family to hold. "That is not all," Grady said, speaking for the first time, his finger on the second page. He read it aloud in a low voice. "Daniel had discovered while looking into the heart condition that would kill him, tracing it back through medical history and public record, that their father had carried on a second life for decades. A woman in another part of the state, and 2 children by her, a son and a daughter born while our mother was still married to him and continued long after she was gone. 2 more Callaways grown now in their 50s, almost certainly unaware of the family they had been kept from. So I said and understood at last the full shape of what my husband had done. 2 half-siblings who share your blood. Daniel found them. He confirmed they exist," Warren said, scanning the letter again as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less enormous. "Their names, where they live. He verified it through public records, nothing more. He writes here that he never contacted them, that their lives were their own, and it was not his place to detonate them with the truth. He writes that he kept it only as a shield, in case one of us ever came for you needing exactly what you have come here needing now." The irony of it filled the room and left no space for anything else. They had come to ask my daughter, the niece they had tried to defraud to give up a kidney, while blood relatives of their own existed, whom their own father had hidden relatives Daniel had known about and protected the knowledge of, so that this moment could go the way it was now going. "There is a doctor at your side," I said. "I imagine he will tell you that half-siblings are worth testing, that they widen the pool, that, with the list and the paired programs, you have more roads than you thought. Daniel gave you those roads. He did it for me and for Sloane, but he gave them to you. Strangers," Warren said weakly. "We do not even know them." "And whose doing is that?" I said, not unkindly, because there was no satisfaction in it. "Your father chose to hide them. You chose to treat your youngest brother as something less than yourselves for his whole life. These are the harvests of the choices your family made. But you are not without a way forward. You have their names. I would begin there, Warren, not with demands and not with lawyers. With the truth and with humility and with the understanding that the choice is theirs to make and no one else's. Exactly the way it should have been Sloane's choice if you had come to her honestly from the start." The 3 of them sat in a silence that had aged them, the family resemblance to my husband suddenly clear in the lines of their chastened faces, the same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes. Warren folded the letter with great care and returned it to its envelope. And when he stood, it was with the effort of a man carrying more than his own weight. "Thank you," he said, and I do not think he had said those 2 words together in a long time and meant them. "For this." Hank showed them out, and I stood at the window and watched the 3 vehicles go down the white lane and out through the iron gates, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad and strangely clean, the way you feel when a thing that has been dragging behind you for a long time is finally set down. My husband had known he had other family in the world, people who might have welcomed him, who shared his very blood. And he had chosen instead to build a life out of the people he picked, and the people who picked him, and to keep the rest sealed in an envelope as a last defense of the family he loved. That night I opened the laptop for the day's video, and Daniel appeared recorded a year before in the very room where I sat. "Hello, my love," he said. "If my arithmetic is right, then my brothers have finally played their last card, and you have given Warren the letter." He looked thoughtful. "I considered finding those two over the years. My brother and sister I never met. But their lives were built and whole, and I had no right to walk into them carrying a bomb." He was quiet a moment. "The truth is, Kendra, that family was never about blood for me. It was about choice. I chose you. I chose Sloan. That was always enough. It was more than enough. I hope whoever my brothers reach out to now is given the same freedom I was never given to help or not to open the door or leave it closed without anyone forcing their hand." I sat with him in the firelight until the video ended on his still smiling face, and then I sat a while longer in the quiet. Spring came back to Larkspur Hollow the way it always does, even when you cannot imagine it in the deep of winter. The snow drew back off the western hills, and green came up through the pastures, and Cascade Ridge began its careful, limited work on the ground under terms I could sign my name to without shame. Sloan visited when she could, and once walking the eastern meadow with her in the new grass, she told me she thought she might like to bring children here someday to run in the fields her grandfather had reclaimed. Warren, I heard through Maggie some months later, had written a careful letter to a man and a woman in another part of the state, and had received against all his family's history a cautious reply. What came of it, I never fully learned, and it was never mine to know. It was theirs exactly as Daniel had wanted. I finished the novel that spring, the one I had carried unwritten for 30 years, and finally set down in the leather journal my husband had left waiting on the shelf. It was not the book I would have written at 25. It was better because it was true. It braided 3 threads together, the land as it was now, and the broken place it had been, and the older ground beneath both, and it followed a woman learning late that it is never too late. And I hung the first typed page of it in a frame on the great room wall among the first editions and the mounted manuscripts where Daniel had left a bare space I had not understood until that moment was meant for exactly this. The forbidden farm had become the opposite of forbidden. The secret had become the thing I was proudest of in all the world. And I, Kendra Calloway, who had arrived a fog-bound widow with a borrowed spine, had become the keeper of a legacy that was built not on obligation and not on blood, but on the only foundation that ever truly holds, which is love freely given and gratefully received. Until tomorrow, my love, Daniel said at the end of the last video I would watch for a long while. Until tomorrow, I whispered back, and I meant the word the way he had taught me to mean it, not as an ending, but as a promise that the story went on. Thank you so much for staying with me to the end of this one. If it moved you, share it with someone who loves a story like this. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one, and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. Until next time.